Chapter 1. In the sprawling, restless city of New York lived a young woman named Alara Winters. To the wealthy patrons she occasionally served and the hurried crowds she navigated through, she was nearly invisible, just another girl trying to survive, her face blending into the background. Her life from the outside seemed simple, only work and quiet existence. But inside the cramped apartment she called home in the Bronx, a different story unfolded, thick with the scent of yesterday's fears. Era woke at 4 a.m, pulled from restless sleep not by light, but by the sound of her mother coughing, wet and rattling, the kind that brought blood. She rushed to find her mother, Margaret, trembling with a stained cloth pressed to her lips. In the corner stood her 8-year-old brother, Ethan, eyes wide with terror, his small hands signing frantically. He had been mute since birth, and his silence in moments like these felt heavier than any scream. She signed back that everything would be fine, a lie she had told so many times it no longer felt like lying. The cancer was stage 3, and without insurance, they were watching her mother fade one cough at a time. The apartment walls were stained with mold. Pipes leaked brown water. Cockroaches crawled freely. The refrigerator held only expired milk and bread she had to cut mold from before giving to Ethan. On the table sat a mountain of bills. Hospital fees long overdue. Rent 2 months late. Nearly $90,000 in debt. The landlord had come 3 days ago, his threats of eviction sharp as knives. 2 weeks earlier, she had lost her job for refusing to provide special services to a customer. But today, there was work, a last-minute shift at a charity gala at the Obsidian Hotel. The pay was more than a week of wages, a lifeline she clung to with desperate hope. She had heard whispers about the Obsidian, that it belonged to dangerous people who made others disappear. She dressed in her black and white uniform, hand-washed and dried overnight. Her mother stirred, finding Era in the dim light. "You are leaving," she whispered. "Yes, Mama. Be careful, my daughter. Those places are not for people like us, and the men there are dangerous." Era forced a tired smile. "Just one night. I will bring something home," she promised, a vow she had made 100 times. Chapter 2. Hours later, she stood in the service basement with 20 other temporary workers, their anxious faces lit by harsh fluorescent lights. Helena Cross, the event coordinator, stood before them with a clipboard like a weapon. "Listen up," Helena barked. "You are replaceable. One mistake and you are out. No pay, no second chance." Her gaze landed on Era. "You are on VIP service. You will serve the guest of honor exclusively. Do not speak unless spoken to. You are wallpaper. The guest of honor is Nicholas Salvatore." Era's breath caught. Everyone knew that name. The most ruthless Mafia boss in New York. His foundation-funded scholarships she had once dreamed of, applications still hidden under her mattress, hopes that died when she dropped out to protect her family. Serving him now felt like fate mocking her. She nodded, her face a mask of calm she did not feel. She would be invisible. She would make no mistake. Era was escorted upstairs by a security guard to familiarize herself with the layout before the guests arrived. She stepped out of the elevator and froze, as if she had crossed into another world, a world she had only ever seen in dreams or on the old television screens in hospital waiting rooms. The grand hall of the Obsidian Hotel unfolded before her like a palace from a fairy tale, but the kind of fairy tale meant for those who held the power of life and death, not for poor girls from the Bronx. The black marble floor gleamed so flawlessly that she could see her own reflection in it, white veins running through the stone like frozen silver rivers in a sea of night. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the soaring ceiling, thousands of crystals scattering a warm glow like imprisoned stars. Each chandelier likely worth more than the decaying apartment her family was living in. Chapter 3. Everywhere around her, teams of staff moved with the precision of an orchestra conducted by an unseen hand. They spread pristine white silk tablecloths, the kind of silk that she knew just by touching cost more than her entire month's rent. Polished silver plates were lined up in perfect order. Gold-plated cutlery gleamed beneath the lights. Crystal glasses so delicate they seemed as if they could shatter with a single breath. She passed the bar area and saw bottles of liquor lined up on the shelves, names she couldn't pronounce because they were in French or Italian. But she knew each bottle was worth 3 months of her mother's medication. 3 months her mother could live longer, hope longer, watch Ethan grow just a little more. All of it locked inside a single bottle that people here would empty in minutes and forget. But what made her chest tighten wasn't the liquor or the crystal or the silk. It was the flowers. Massive floral arrangements stood throughout the hall, each one reaching her chest, overflowing with pure white lilies, pale purple orchids, and deep red roses the color of blood. A sweet fragrance filled the air, a kind of luxury scent she had never known. She stopped in front of one arrangement, staring at the flawless petals without a single crease, and her mind began calculating on its own. One rose here, just one, was probably worth a week of pain medication for her mother. This entire arrangement could pay for a full round of chemotherapy, and there were dozens like it scattered across the hall. Hundreds of flowers that would wilt after tonight and be thrown away like trash, while her mother was wasting away on a damp bed because there was no money for medicine. A surge of anger rose in Era's chest, hot and bitter. She wanted to scream, to ask why the world was this unfair, why some people could throw money at decorative flowers while others had to choose between buying bread or buying medicine. But she swallowed the rage like bitter honey because she knew anger wouldn't help. Anger wouldn't pay the debts. Anger wouldn't cure cancer. Anger would only cost her her job, and losing her job meant losing the last fragile lifeline she had. Chapter 4. Era was checking the placement of the glasses on the VIP table when a voice sliced through the air like a blade, sharp, cold, and dripping with contempt. She turned her head and saw a woman enter the grand hall. No, not enter, but appear as if the entire room had been created solely as a backdrop for her. Victoria Ashford wore a blazing red gown the color of blood, diamonds cascading over her neck and wrists, each stone glittering beneath the chandeliers like tiny imprisoned stars against her ivory skin. Her golden blonde hair was styled into flawless waves that spilled over her shoulders. Her face perfectly made up without a single flaw. Her red lips curved into a smile that Era instantly recognized as fake. She was beautiful, breathtakingly so, but it was the cold beauty of a statue, perfect and lifeless. Trailing behind Victoria was a photographer clutching a professional camera and 2 makeup artists hovering like obedient puppies. Victoria stopped in the center of the hall, swept her gaze around, then frowned, irritation clearly etched on her face as if she had just caught an unpleasant smell. "This lighting won't do," she declared, her voice echoing through the room. "It makes my skin look washed out. Fix it." A technician hurried over to adjust the lights while Victoria stood there with her arms crossed, fingers tapping impatiently against her arm. She looked toward the stage where the speech would take place and strode forward with long, commanding steps. "I'll stand here when I introduce Nicholas," Victoria told the photographer. "3/4 angle, remember, not straight on. Straight on makes my nose look bigger. And when I hug him, Shoot from the left. The left is my best side. She tested a few poses, tilting her head left then right, checking the shadows on her face as if this were a magazine photo shoot and not a charity gala. Era stood motionless in a corner, watching in silence. She noticed that Victoria didn't glance once at the banners about underprivileged children hanging on the walls, didn't spare a second for the scholarship flyers laid out on the tables. To her, tonight wasn't a charity event. Tonight was the night of Victoria Ashford, and everything else was merely a prop. Chapter 5. A young waitress accidentally passed by at the exact moment Victoria was posing, blocking the camera's view. Victoria spun around, her blue eyes icy and sharp. "Are you blind?" she hissed, her voice venomous. "Or is your brain as empty as the tray you're carrying?" The waitress trembled and bowed her head in apology. But Victoria wasn't finished. She stepped closer and without a word of warning, slapped the girl hard across the face. The sound cracked through the hall, freezing everyone in place. "Watch where you're going next time," Victoria said coolly, then turned away as if she had just brushed dust from her dress. No one dared to speak. The waitress stood there, one hand clutching her reddening cheek, tears threatening to spill but not daring to fall. Era felt her blood boil. She wanted to step forward, wanted to say something, but her feet felt nailed to the floor. She remembered being harassed by her old restaurant manager, remembered the humiliation of being treated like trash. She understood the look in that waitress's eyes, the look of someone who knew she had no right to fight back, no right to be angry, only the right to bow her head and endure because she needed the money. Victoria stepped out onto the small balcony at the corner of the hall, pulled out her phone, and turned her back to the room. Era wasn't trying to eavesdrop. She was only moving toward the drink preparation area and happened to pass by. But Victoria's voice carried to her ears, low but clear enough to hear. "Is everything ready?" Victoria asked, her tone completely different from her earlier arrogance, darker, more secretive. "Good. Tonight will end everything. After tonight, it'll all be ours." She paused, listening to the person on the other end, then let out a soft laugh, cold as a winter wind. "Don't worry, he doesn't suspect a thing. He trusts me completely." Victoria ended the call, turned back with a radiant smile as if she had been discussing the weather, and walked back into the hall to continue posing for the photographer. Era stood there, her heart pounding wildly. She didn't understand what she had just heard, but something felt wrong. Something dark lurked beneath those whispered words. The survival instinct sharpened by years of hardship warned her that something wasn't right, though she didn't know what it was. Chapter 6. Era was still thinking about Victoria's mysterious phone call when the atmosphere in the grand hall abruptly changed. There were no drums, no announcements, no spectacle of any kind. Yet she felt the shift as clearly as if the temperature in the room had dropped several degrees. Staff members who had been moving suddenly froze, whispered conversations fell silent, and every gaze turned toward the side entrance. Era turned her head, and for the first time in her life, she saw Nicholas Salvatore in the flesh. He entered through the side door, not the main entrance like Victoria, as if he didn't need anyone's attention to assert his presence. And he truly didn't. His presence alone was an irresistible force, like a black hole pulling all light and attention toward itself without effort. He was taller than she had imagined, likely over 6 feet, broad-shouldered, his physique honed and contained beneath a perfectly tailored black suit, the kind that cost more than an entire year of her wages just by looking at it. His hair was ink black, slicked back to reveal a sharply defined face with a jawline that looked carved from stone. But what Era couldn't look away from were his eyes, gray like the sky before a storm, cold and unfathomably deep, as if they could see straight through anyone's soul. And the scar, a faint scar, ran from his temple down to his left cheekbone. Not long, but long enough to tell a story of violence and survival. It didn't make him less handsome. If anything, it made him more dangerous, a silent warning that this was a man who had walked through hell and lived. Walking just behind Nicholas was a large, solidly built, middle-aged man with the expressionless face of a statue. Tony Russo, Era guessed, the boss's driver and most trusted bodyguard. She had heard whispers about Tony, that he had once been a mercenary before Nicholas's father saved his life, and that he had been loyal unto death ever since. The two men moved as one, Tony always positioned to shield Nicholas from any threat, his eyes sweeping the room like radar, searching for danger. Chapter 7. Victoria spotted Nicholas and transformed instantly. The disdain she had shown the staff vanished, replaced by a radiant smile and sparkling eyes, as if she had just seen the love of her life. She hurried over, her heels clicking against the marble, and looped her arm through Nicholas's with perfectly rehearsed affection. "Darling, I missed you so much," she murmured loudly enough for those nearby to hear. But Era noticed something no one else seemed to, because no one dared to look closely. Nicholas didn't return the embrace. His arm hung loosely at his side. His body didn't lean toward Victoria by even a millimeter, and those gray eyes looked elsewhere, as if his mind was very far away. It was the cold distance of two strangers, not of an engaged couple. At that moment, a young waitress carrying a tray of crystal glasses passed by, likely overwhelmed by the boss's arrival. She tripped over a chair leg and pitched forward. The tray tilted, the expensive glasses sliding to one side, on the verge of crashing to the floor. Era saw everything slow down. Imagined the sound of shattering glass, Helena's furious shouting, and the poor waitress being thrown out with nothing to her name. But it didn't happen. Nicholas, with lightning-fast reflexes, stepped forward and caught the waitress by the arm, steadying her while his other hand gripped the edge of the tray to keep it from tipping further. The glasses trembled but didn't fall. "Careful," he said, his voice low and calm, as if he had just picked up a fallen leaf rather than saved someone from disaster. "The floor is slippery." The waitress stood there shaking, her face pale, lips moving without sound. Nicholas didn't wait for thanks. He simply gave a small nod and moved on, as if what he had done wasn't worth mentioning. Era stood there, witnessing it all, a strange confusion rising inside her. She had prepared herself to serve a devil, a cold-blooded killer everyone feared. But that devil had just saved a waitress from being fired without asking for a word of gratitude. She glanced at Victoria, still clinging to Nicholas's arm with her fake smile, and remembered how she had slapped a staff member simply for crossing the camera's view. They were about to be married, yet they were worlds apart. One struck a worker for being in the way. One steadied a worker to keep her from falling. Chapter 8. Era tried to push the image of Nicholas steadying the waitress out of her mind and refocus on her work. She moved back toward the VIP table for one final check before the guests arrived, making sure everything was perfect, just as Helena demanded. The glasses had to gleam. The napkins had to be folded precisely. The cutlery had to be aligned. She bent down to adjust a glass that was slightly out of place, so absorbed in that small detail that she didn't notice someone walking toward her. When she straightened and turned, she collided with a wall. No, not a wall. A solid chest. The faint scent of expensive cologne mixed with something unmistakably masculine and dangerous. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized who she had just run into. Nicholas Salvatore stood directly in front of her, close enough that she could have counted every stitch on the lapel of his suit if she had dared to look up. But she didn't dare. She dropped her gaze instantly, her heart pounding like a war drum, her hands gripping the hem of her uniform so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to control it. "I wasn't watching where I was going. Please forgive me." She waited for the anger, for the shouting, for being thrown out just as Helena had warned. One mistake and she would disappear, unpaid, without a second chance. She had made that mistake, and now everything was over. But the shouting never came. Instead, there was silence, stretching for several seconds that felt like centuries. Then a low, steady voice spoke, not angry, not cold, only touched with a gentle curiosity she hadn't expected. "What's your name?" Era froze. She wasn't sure she had heard correctly. The most feared mafia boss in New York was asking her name. A temporary waitress who would vanish from this world after tonight as if she had never existed. She swallowed, still unable to lift her head. Era Winters. Her voice was barely above a breath, and she wondered if he could even hear it. "Era," he repeated, and the way he said her name made it sound unfamiliar, almost melodic, as if he were tasting each syllable carefully. "Era Winters." Then he said something she never could have anticipated, something that would carve itself into her memory forever. "Lift your head." Chapter 9. She didn't react, thinking she must have misheard. "Lift your head," he repeated, his voice still calm, but softened by something she couldn't name. "You don't owe anyone your gaze. Don't bow your head as if you're guilty." Era slowly raised her head as if her neck were rusted and every centimeter required effort, and then her eyes met his. Those gray eyes looked straight at her, not through her the way wealthy people usually did, but at her, truly seeing her as a person rather than a shadow. There was no contempt in them, none of the indifference she had learned to accept. There was only pure attention, as if in that moment she were the only person in the room worth looking at. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but to Era, it felt as long as an entire lifetime. She didn't know how to respond, didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. No one had ever told her to lift her head instead of bowing it. Her whole life, she had been taught to lower her gaze, to make herself small, to remain invisible. And now, the most powerful man in this city, the man everyone feared, had told her not to bow her head. Nicholas gave a small nod as if he had just completed some unspoken ritual, then walked away, leaving Era standing in the glittering hall with a heart beating to a rhythm she couldn't name. She watched his back disappear into the crowd of staff and wondered whether she had just met a devil or an angel. Or maybe, just maybe, he was both. The grand hall of the Obsidian flared to life as the first guests began to arrive. Era stood at her assigned position near the VIP table, a silver tray balanced in her hands, her face fixed in the professional, emotionless calm she had learned through years of serving. Inside, however, her mind still lingered on the brief encounter with Nicholas, his words echoing like a melody she couldn't shake. She didn't owe anyone her gaze. No one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever looked at her the way he had. Chapter 10. Guests filed in one by one, expensive suits and glittering evening gowns, diamonds and gold catching the light of the chandeliers. They laughed, shook hands, exchanged polite embraces with smiles that never reached their eyes. Era realized this wasn't merely a charity gala. This was a stage for the powerful, a place where silent deals were sealed with glances and subtle nods. She spotted faces she guessed belonged to bosses of other mafia families. Men with the eyes of predators and women as beautiful and deadly as vipers at their sides. All attention gravitated toward the VIP table where Nicholas Salvatore sat like a king upon his throne. Victoria sat beside him, her hand resting possessively on his arm, her radiant smile never fading. She laughed at the right moments, spoke the right words, tilted her head at the perfect angle whenever a camera turned their way. It was a flawless performance of the perfect fiancée. But Era, who had survived by observing her whole life, noticed what the cameras missed. The slight shudder that ran through Victoria when Nicholas touched her, as if she were suppressing revulsion. The way her eyes skimmed past Nicholas, searching for someone else in the crowd. The way her smile vanished the instant no one was watching, revealing a face cold and calculating. Era poured champagne into Nicholas's glass, lowering her head just enough to show respect, but not as deeply as she once would have. She remembered his words and kept her back a little straighter. He didn't look at her, absorbed in conversation with the man beside him. Yet she sensed that he knew she was there. She poured for Victoria, who didn't bother to acknowledge her, as if Era were nothing more than air. Then she moved to the place of the man Nicholas was speaking with, Marco Benedetti. Era had heard Helena mention the name during the assignments. Salvatore's advisor, the most trusted man in the family. He appeared to be around 40, his hair threaded with gray, his face carrying the refined handsomeness of a gentleman. Yet something in his eyes unsettled her, a cunning hidden beneath the trustworthy exterior. Chapter 11. As she poured champagne for Marco, she caught his gaze flick toward Victoria, swift as lightning, but unmistakable. It wasn't the look of a man glancing at his boss's fiancée. It was the look of a lover, heated and full of desire. Era continued to observe as she moved around the table like a shadow. The discreet touches beneath the tablecloth between Victoria and Marco when the fabric shielded them from view. A small slip of paper passed from Victoria's hand to Marco's as she pretended to reach for a napkin. The looks they exchanged whenever Nicholas turned away to speak with someone else, brief yet laden with meaning. Era felt her stomach tighten. She wasn't foolish. She knew what she was seeing. Victoria Ashford, Nicholas Salvatore's beautiful fiancée, was having an affair with his right hand. Yet there was something more, a sense of unease she couldn't name. She remembered the phone call she had overheard earlier, Victoria whispering that tonight would end everything. She watched the way Victoria and Marco looked at each other, not with the eyes of secret lovers, but with the eyes of conspirators waiting for something. Something was going to happen tonight. She felt it in the air, in the tension Victoria tried to mask behind her smile, in the way Marco kept checking his watch as if counting down to a critical moment. Era told herself it wasn't her concern. She was just a waitress. She only needed to finish her job and go home to her mother and Ethan. The schemes of the powerful had nothing to do with her. But a small part of her, the part that had seen Nicholas steady the stumbling waitress, the part that had heard him say she didn't need to bow her head, felt a strange worry she couldn't explain. She shook it away. Nicholas Salvatore was a mafia boss. He had an entire army protecting him. He didn't need the concern of a poor girl from the Bronx, and she shouldn't care about his fate. She shouldn't care at all. Chapter 12. Era's champagne tray was more than half empty, and she needed to return to the preparation area to fetch more. She dipped her head slightly to excuse herself from the VIP section and slipped through the crowd of guests with the practiced ease of someone used to moving unseen. The grand hall was now packed, laughter and conversation blending with the soft music from the band in the corner, the scent of expensive perfume mixing with alcohol and food. She headed toward a side corridor leading to the kitchen area where fewer people passed and the air was cooler, away from the harsh glow of the chandeliers. The hallway was quiet, only the soft echo of her heels against the stone floor accompanying her steps. As she passed a small room, perhaps a storage space or a staff break room, voices drifted out and made her stop short. Marco Benedetti's voice, low and controlled yet clear in the stillness of the corridor. Era knew she should keep walking, pretend she hadn't heard anything, and return to her work. But there was something in that voice, a tension, a secrecy that seemed to nail her feet to the floor. "Is everything ready?" Marco asked, clearly speaking on the phone with someone. "The glass has been marked, right? We need to be certain there are no mistakes." "Just one glass, the one meant for him." Era held her breath, her heart pounding violently in her chest. She knew she shouldn't listen, shouldn't be here, but she couldn't move. Marco's voice continued, cold and calculating, as if he were discussing the weather rather than something far darker. "Ryson," Marco said, his voice lower, but Era could still hear because she stood close to the wall, her ear angled toward the slightly open door. "Colorless, odorless. After the speech, when he raises the glass for a toast, it'll be over. Sudden heart failure, a tragedy among the elite. No one will suspect a thing." Era's blood turned to ice. Ryson. She didn't know much about poison, but she knew enough to understand it could kill. And the glass was marked. The glass meant for him. Who was him? She knew the answer before she had time to think. There was only one man here referred to with that pronoun, spoken with such fear and reverence. Nicholas Salvatore. Chapter 13. "Victoria knows the plan, right?" Marco asked, and Era felt her stomach twist violently. Victoria, the beautiful fiancée sitting beside Nicholas, her hand resting on his arm with practiced affection. She knew. She was part of this. "Good," Marco said. "After he's dead, everything will belong to her, and she'll belong to me. The Salvatore Empire will be ours." 10 years of waiting, 10 years of playing the loyal man, finally rewarded. Era heard footsteps inside the room, as if Marco were pacing back and forth. She had to get away. If he discovered she had heard this, she would die. She knew it with the same certainty that she knew the sun would rise the next morning. These people were planning to kill the most powerful Mafia boss in New York. They wouldn't hesitate to eliminate an anonymous poor waitress. She stepped back slowly, carefully, trying not to make a sound, her heart racing so wildly she feared Marco might hear it. "Don't let Chef Carlo mess this up," Marco said, his voice sharpening. "Remind him, only the glass with the green mark. No mistakes. After tonight, he'll have enough money to disappear from the country forever." Chef Carlo. The chef. Era carved the name into her memory, though she had no idea what she would do with it. She kept retreating one step at a time until she was far enough to turn and walk quickly toward the kitchen, forcing herself not to hurry too much, not to draw attention if anyone happened to see her. When she reached the drink preparation area, she leaned against the wall, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip the counter to stay upright. What had she just heard? She had just become a witness to an assassination plot. Marco Benedetti, Nicholas's most trusted right hand, was planning to kill him with the help of Victoria, the fiancée he was about to marry. And a chef named Carlo would be the one to do it, slipping ricin into the champagne glass marked in green, the glass that she, Era Winters, the VIP server, would be the one to place into Nicholas Salvatore's hand. Chapter 14. Era forced herself to calm down, breathing deeply and evenly until her heart no longer felt as if it might burst from her chest. She told herself she had misheard, that maybe Marco had been talking about something else, that she was being paranoid because of stress. But deep down she knew she hadn't misheard. Every word Marco had spoken still echoed in her mind like a death knell. Ricin, the glass with the green mark, sudden heart failure, after the speech. She shook her head hard as if she could drive the thoughts out by force. This wasn't her business. She was just a waitress. She had nothing to do with these powerful people and their dark schemes. She only needed to finish her job, take the money, and go home to her mother and Ethan. That was all. She stepped into the drink preparation area where rows of expensive champagne bottles stood neatly arranged and gleaming crystal glasses waited to be filled. A man in a chef's uniform stood there with his back to her, doing something with a single glass set apart from the others. When he turned, Era recognized Chef Carlo from the name tag on his chest. His face was tight with tension, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. And when he saw Era, he startled as if caught doing something wrong. "What do you need?" he asked, his voice dry and guarded. "I'm here to get more champagne for the VIP section," Era replied, forcing her tone to remain steady. Chef Carlo nodded and stepped aside, but his eyes never left her until she picked up the prepared tray of drinks. Era set the tray on the counter to inspect it, counting the glasses as she always did before carrying them out. And that was when she saw it. A glass placed at the center of the tray, no different from the others at first glance, champagne bubbling golden beneath the light. But when she lifted the glass to check for smudges, as Helena had instructed, she saw something that made her heart nearly stop. A small green sticker, no larger than a fingertip, affixed to the bottom of the glass in a spot no one would ever see unless they deliberately turned it over. The glass with the green mark. Chapter 15. Marco's words thundered in her head. Only the glass with the green mark. No mistakes. Era set the glass down, her hands shaking so badly she almost spilled it. This was the glass. The glass with the ricin. The glass that would kill Nicholas Salvatore. And she was the one who would carry it to him. She would be the unknowing instrument of murder if she hadn't overheard that phone call. She stood there staring at the glass as if it were a venomous snake ready to strike at any moment. Her mind spun with 1,000 chaotic thoughts. What should she do? Who could she tell? Who would believe her? A poor anonymous waitress accusing the powerful advisor of a mafia boss. They would laugh in her face, or worse, they would kill her to silence her. Marco had an entire network of power within this family. He had played the loyal man for 10 years. Who would believe the words of a girl they had never met over the right hand who had served them for a decade? But what if she stayed silent? What if she pretended she knew nothing and carried that glass to the VIP table as instructed? Nicholas would raise it, would drink, and would die. A man would die by her hands, even if she hadn't meant it. She would live the rest of her life with that secret, knowing she could have stopped a murder and chose silence out of fear. Could she bear that? Could she look into her mother's eyes, into Ethan's eyes, and pretend nothing had happened? Era thought of Nicholas. He was Mafia, a boss of the underworld, someone who might have killed, who might have done terrible things she couldn't imagine. But he was also the man who had caught a stumbling waitress without expecting thanks. He was the man who had looked into her eyes and told her she didn't need to bow her head. He was the only person in that room full of power who had treated her like a human being. Did he deserve to die? Who had the right to decide that? Marco Benedetti, the traitor who had lain in wait for 10 years? Victoria Ashford, the fake woman willing to kill her future husband to seize his empire? She looked down at her hands, hands that had worked relentlessly her entire life to support her family, hands that had held her mother through nights of pain, hands that had taught Ethan sign language when the boy was alone in his silent world. These hands would become the hands of a killer if she delivered that glass to Nicholas. Even if she hadn't poisoned it, even if she hadn't known, she would still be the final link in this murder plot. And she couldn't accept that. Chapter 16. But if she acted, she would lose everything. Tonight's pay, her job, perhaps even her life. Her mother would have no money for medicine. Ethan would have no one to care for him. She was standing at a crossroads, one path leading to her family's safety, the other to her own conscience, and she didn't know which path she would choose. The music stopped and the lights in the grand hall softened, leaving only the spotlight trained on the stage. It was time for the speech. Era stood at her position near the VIP table, the champagne tray steady in her hands, the glass with the green sticker resting at the center like a ticking bomb. She still hadn't decided what she would do. Her mind a storm of fear, doubt, and something that felt like anger at the injustice she had been pushed into. Nicholas stepped onto the stage amid polite applause, his stride confident and commanding, as if the world itself had been built for him to walk across. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nicholas began, his deep voice carrying through the hall. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight, not only to support the Salvatore Foundation, but to support the children we're trying to help." Era watched him beneath the spotlight, the light crowning him like a halo, and she thought of the children he spoke of, children like Ethan, like herself once, poor children dreaming of chances they were never meant to have. His foundation funded scholarships for those children. And even if he was Mafia, even if he might have done terrible things, he was doing this one good thing. Who had the right to take that away? "This year," Nicholas continued, "we've awarded full scholarships to more than 200 students from low-income families. 200 children who now have a chance to go to school, a chance to dream, a chance to become whatever they want to be. That's why we're here tonight. Not for prestige, not for pretty photographs, but for those children." Era swallowed. She glanced at Victoria at the VIP table, her radiant smile fixed in place, her eyes cold and untouched by his words. Then she looked at Marco, nodding with false approval while his hand clenched beneath the table, waiting for the moment everything would end. "And now," Nicholas said, his voice warming, "I invite all of you to raise a glass with me, to toast the future of the children we're helping, and to thank you for your generosity tonight." He stepped down from the stage to applause, and Era knew the moment had come. Chapter 17. She moved toward the VIP table with the champagne tray, her legs heavy as if weighted with lead, her heart pounding wildly. She set the tray down and began handing out glasses. A glass for Victoria, a glass for Marco, glasses for the other guests, and finally, the glass with the green sticker, the lethal one, placed directly before Nicholas, exactly as instructed. Nicholas lifted the glass, golden bubbles shimmering beneath the lights. Era stepped back one pace, the proper distance for an invisible server. She could stay silent. She could turn away, take her pay, and go home as if nothing had happened. Nicholas would drink, would die, and no one would know she had known. She would be safe. Her family would be safe. It was the easy choice, the choice anyone in her position would make. But Era wasn't just anyone. She was the girl who had raised a deaf brother with bare hands while still a teenager. She was the woman who had refused to sell herself even when desperation closed in. She was the person who had taught Ethan that no matter how cruel the world was, there were still right things worth protecting. Letting a man die in front of her when she could stop it, that wasn't the person she wanted to be. It wasn't the example she wanted to set for her brother. Nicholas raised the glass to his chest, smiling at the crowd. "To the future," he said. "To the future," the hall echoed back, a forest of crystal lifted high. Victoria smiled, anticipation lighting her eyes. Marco clenched his fist beneath the table, jaw tight. Nicholas brought the glass to his lips, and Era acted. She didn't think or calculate. She moved on pure instinct. She lunged forward, and before anyone could understand what was happening, she drove her fist straight into Nicholas Salvatore's face. The punch was hard enough that pain shot through her knuckles, but it did what she needed. The champagne glass flew from Nicholas's hand, arcing through the air in slow motion before shattering across the black marble with a sharp crash that rang through the deadly silence. 1 second, 2 seconds. The entire hall froze as if under a spell. No one breathed. No one moved. Then hell broke loose. Chapter 18. "Assassin!" someone screamed. "She's an assassin!" Security surged in from every direction like wolves, guns drawn, metal clattering. Era was slammed to the floor with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs. Her face pressed against cold stone, her arms wrenched behind her back. Someone drove a boot into her spine. Someone yanked her hair. She heard Victoria screaming somewhere above, her voice shrill with fury. "Get her!" She tried to kill Nicholas. "Kill her!" Marco's voice cut through the chaos, cold and decisive. "Take her to the basement. I'll handle her myself." Era was dragged across the floor, marble scraping her skin, her head striking table legs. She didn't fight back. She gathered what strength she had left and screamed, her voice tearing through the uproar. "That glass was poisoned. Check the glass. There's a green sticker on the bottom." No one listened, or no one wanted to. She kept screaming until she was dragged into an elevator and the doors slammed shut, swallowing her voice into darkness. The basement room was freezing and pitch black, lit only by a single bare bulb casting a dull yellow glow over a metal chair positioned at the center. Era was shoved into the chair with enough force that she nearly fell. Her hands cuffed tightly behind her back, cold metal biting into the skin of her wrists. She tasted blood in her mouth from the split lip she'd suffered when she was slammed to the floor in the grand hall, and one side of her face was swelling from where it had struck a table leg. But she didn't cry. She'd learned not to cry when she was very young, from nights when her stepfather came home drunk and took his rage out on her mother, from days of hunger so sharp her stomach cramped while she still smiled at Ethan so he wouldn't be afraid. Tears didn't solve anything. Tears were a weakness she couldn't afford. Chapter 19. The door opened and Marco Benedetti walked in, followed by 2 guards built like walking walls. He removed his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his dress shirt as if preparing for physical labor, the yellow light carving harsh shadows across his face. "Close the door," Marco ordered, and the door slammed shut behind the guards, leaving her alone with the man she knew wanted Nicholas dead, alone with the man who now certainly wanted her dead as well. Marco pulled another chair close and sat facing her, so near she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with whiskey. He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes alight with the cruelty she had sensed beneath his polished exterior earlier that evening. Then he spoke, his voice disturbingly gentle. "Who sent you here?" "No one," Era replied, her voice hoarse but steady. "I'm just a waitress." Marco nodded as if considering her answer. Then, without warning, he slapped her across the face. The blow snapped her head to the side, her ears ringing for seconds as the taste of blood deepened in her mouth. "Don't play games," Marco said, his tone still mild, as if he'd merely asked about her health instead of striking her. "Who do you work for? Ricci? Colombo? Or someone out of Chicago sent you?" Era lifted her head and looked straight into his eyes despite the pain throbbing through her face. "I don't work for anyone. The champagne glass was poisoned. You need to check it." Marco laughed, the sound cold and empty. "Poison." He stood and began to circle her like a predator stalking prey. A poor waitress from the Bronx suddenly knows about poisons and assassination plots. Fascinating. "How stupid do you think I am?" He stopped behind her and Era felt his breath against her neck, cold as air from hell. "I'll ask you one last time," Marco whispered beside her ear. "Who sent you? Give me a name and I'll let you die quickly. Refuse and I'll make you beg for death for hours." Era swallowed, her heart pounding like a war drum, but she refused to let fear show on her face. "No one sent me. I heard you on the phone in the hallway. You talked about the marked glass, about Ryson, about killing Nicholas after the speech. I saw the green sticker under the glass. I know what you're doing." Chapter 20. Marco froze for a moment, the silence turning thick enough to cut. Then he stepped back in front of her, his face twisted with rage, all traces of refinement gone. "You heard me," he hissed. "How much did you hear?" Era met his gaze, and in that instant, she chose to tell the truth, because lying wouldn't save her, and the truth might frighten him. "I heard everything. Ryson, Chef Carlo, Victoria, the Salvatore Empire going to you after Nicholas dies. 10 years of pretending to be loyal. I heard it all." Marco slapped her again and again and again, each blow harder than the last. Era's head snapping back and forth like a broken puppet. She felt blood streaming from her nose, from her lips, iron filling her mouth. But she didn't beg. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She only stared at him with eyes that refused to yield, and that seemed to drive him further into madness. "Who do you think you are?" Marco shouted, his control shattering. "You think you can ruin my plan? You're nothing but a nobody waitress. I'll kill you, and tomorrow, no one will know you ever existed." He drew a gun from his holster, the cold click of the chamber echoing through the room. Era looked at the barrel pointed at her head and thought of her mother, thought of Ethan, thought of promises she would never be able to keep. But she didn't regret her choice. She had done the right thing. She had tried to save a man from being murdered by a traitor. Even if she died here, she would die with a clean conscience. But Marco never pulled the trigger. The door burst open with a thunderous crash, and standing in the doorway, grey eyes cold as a blizzard and his face utterly unreadable, was Nicholas Salvatore. Chapter 21. Nicholas stood in the doorway like a statue carved from stone and shadow, grey eyes sweeping the room in a single second and taking in everything. Era with her bruised face and blood at her lip. Marco with a gun in his hand and the look of a man caught in the act. The air was so thick it felt like it could be cut with a knife. Tony Russo stood just behind Nicholas, his hand resting near the gun at his side, ready to move if needed. Marco lowered the weapon at once, his expression shifting swiftly from rage to a carefully masked concern. "Boss," he said, his voice slipping back into professional calm, as if nothing had happened. "I'm interrogating the attacker. She won't say who sent her." Nicholas didn't answer right away. He stepped into the room, each footfall heavy against the cold concrete, and stopped between Marco and Era like a wall made of flesh and will. "Leave," he said, his voice low and even, but carrying a weight that allowed no argument. Marco blinked, surprise flashing briefly across his face before disappearing. "Boss, she's dangerous. Let me handle it." "Leave," Nicholas repeated, this time turning to look directly into Marco's eyes. Era saw Marco shudder despite his effort to hide it. "I'll handle this myself," Nicholas said. Marco hesitated for a heartbeat, his gaze sliding toward Era with a silent threat. Then he bowed his head. "Yes, boss." He walked out, his shoulders rigid, and the door clicked shut behind him. Nicholas motioned for Tony to stand at the corner of the room, then pulled the chair Marco had used and placed it in front of Era. He sat down, resting his hands on his knees, and studied her in silence for a long moment. Era met his gaze, her face throbbing, the taste of blood still in her mouth. But she didn't lower her head. She remembered what he had told her earlier and kept her back straight, even though everything inside her was screaming with pain and exhaustion. He looked at her as if trying to read a book written in a language he had never seen, gray eyes deep and unreadable. Chapter 22. "You punched me," Nicholas finally said. Not a question, but a statement. In front of 300 people, you punched the most powerful mafia boss in New York. Era nodded. There was nothing to deny. "Why?" he asked, his voice still calm, but edged with genuine curiosity. "Because you were about to die," Era answered, her throat dry and her voice hoarse, but every word clear. "That champagne glass was poisoned. There was a green sticker on the bottom to mark it. I heard someone talking about the marked glass and the plan to poison you after the speech." Nicholas didn't react, his face still carved from stone, but Era caught something flicker in his eyes. Interest perhaps, suspicion perhaps, or both. "Where did you hear this?" he asked. "In the hallway," Era said. "When I went to get more champagne. Someone was on the phone in a small room. I heard them talk about ricin, about the glass with the green mark, about you dying from sudden heart failure so no one would suspect anything." "Who said it?" Era hesitated. She remembered Marco's voice, remembered his words, but she also knew Marco was Nicholas's right hand, the most trusted man in this family. If she accused him and Nicholas didn't believe her, she would die. But if she said nothing and Nicholas didn't know who the real enemy was, he would remain in danger. "I didn't see a face," she finally said, choosing to hold back part of the truth. "I only heard a man's voice. But I saw the green sticker. I saw it myself when I checked the glass before bringing it out. It was under the base, no bigger than a fingertip. Green. You can check. The broken glass is still on the floor in the hall." Nicholas watched her a moment longer, gray eyes digging as if searching her soul for lies. Era didn't look away because she had nothing to hide, because she was telling the truth. And because if he intended to kill her, she had already done everything she could. "Why?" Nicholas asked softly, almost a whisper. "You don't know me. I could be a monster. I could have killed people. Why risk everything for someone like me? Era was silent for a moment, considering the question. Because no matter who you are, she finally said, no one deserves to die by betrayal. And because, she hesitated, searching for the right words, you were the first person who looked me in the eye and told me I didn't need to bow my head. Chapter 23. Something shifted in Nicholas's gaze, just for an instant, like a hairline crack forming in eternal ice. Then he stood, pulled out his phone, and turned away from her. Tony, he said, have someone collect the fragments of the champagne glass from the hall. Every piece, especially anything with a green sticker on the bottom. Send them for testing immediately. I want results within 2 hours. Tony nodded and left to carry out the order. Nicholas turned back to Era, and this time there was something different in his eyes, not entirely cold anymore. If you're lying, he said slowly, I'll bury you myself. But if you're telling the truth, he paused as if weighing the words, if you're telling the truth, I'll owe you my life. Then he walked out, leaving Era alone in the freezing basement with a fragile hope that the truth would save her and the fear that it might not be enough. 2 hours passed like 2 centuries. Era sat in the freezing basement, her hands still cuffed behind her back, her body aching from Marco's blows. Yet her mind was strangely clear. She thought of her mother lying in a hospital bed waiting for her to come home, thought of Ethan, who was probably awake and watching the door with worried eyes, thought of everything she would lose if Nicholas didn't believe her. But she also thought of what she had done, of choosing what was right instead of what was safe. And no matter the outcome, she didn't regret it. The door opened and Nicholas walked in with Tony, his face still as unreadable as stone. But in his hand was a file she guessed held the answer to her fate. Nicholas sat down on the chair in front of her, opened the file, and read in silence. Era watched him, trying to read the result from his expression, but his face was an impenetrable wall. Then he looked up, grey eyes fixed on her, and spoke in an even low voice. Ricin. The champagne glass contained ricin, a dose strong enough to kill a healthy adult within 24 hours. The symptoms would mimic sudden heart failure. No one would suspect anything. You told the truth. Chapter 24. Era let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and felt as if an invisible weight had lifted from her body. She wasn't going to die. At least not today. But Nicholas wasn't finished. He turned to the next page of the file and his voice grew colder, sharper, like a blade being honed. We checked the security cameras. Every corner of the hotel has cameras, including the drink preparation area. Era felt her heart quicken as he continued. The footage shows Chef Carlo setting aside a single champagne glass with a green sticker on the bottom, separated from the others. And 30 minutes earlier, the hallway cameras recorded a man entering a storage room and making a phone call. He paused and looked at her with eyes she couldn't read. You said you didn't see his face, but the cameras did. It was Marco Benedetti. Era wasn't surprised, but hearing Nicholas confirm what she already knew still sent a chill through her. Marco, Nicholas's right hand, the most trusted man in the family, was the one trying to kill him. She saw Nicholas grip the file so hard the papers crumpled, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his controlled exterior. There's more, he said, his voice sounding like it came from hell. We reviewed all the footage from tonight. Marco and Victoria met in private 3 times in blind spots they believed were not covered. They kissed. They exchanged documents. They're accomplices. Victoria, the beautiful fiancée with the false smile and ice-cold eyes. Era wasn't surprised. She had seen the looks they shared during the gala, the secret touches beneath the table. But what Nicholas said next truly stunned her. Tony dug deeper, he said, his voice lowering like the growl of an approaching storm. Bank accounts, encrypted messages, hidden transactions. Marco has been transferring money to Victoria for 5 years. They've been planning this for a long time, waiting for the right moment. Then Nicholas stopped, and Era saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Pain. A deep, ancient pain, like a wound that had never healed. Chapter 25. But that's not the worst of it, he said, his voice tightening. Tony found proof that Marco was the one who leaked my father's location to the Ricci family 10 years ago. My father was assassinated in an ambush. And for 10 years, I hunted the traitor. For 10 years, I wondered who sold my father out. And for those 10 years, Marco stood beside me, comforted me, pretended loyalty while he was the one who killed my father. Era looked at Nicholas and for the first time saw him not as a terrifying mafia boss, but as a man facing the most brutal betrayal imaginable. The man he trusted most, the man his father trusted most, was the one who murdered his father and was now trying to murder him. For 10 years, he held me while I cried at my father's funeral, Nicholas said, his voice distant. For 10 years, he swore loyalty to me in blood. For 10 years, he looked me in the eye and called me the son he never had. And it was all a lie. Nicholas stood abruptly and turned his back to Era, his shoulders rigid, his fists clenched at his sides. He stood there in silence for a long time, and when he turned back, his face had returned to its familiar cold mask, but his gray eyes were no longer frozen. They burned with a fire Era knew would consume everyone who had betrayed him. Tony, Nicholas said, his voice cold as steel. Unlock her cuffs. Get her medical care in a clean room. She's my guest from now on. Then he walked toward the door, paused at the threshold, and added without turning around. As for Marco and Victoria, lock them up. I'll handle them myself. And find Chef Carlo before he attempts to flee the city. He will not escape the price of this treachery. Chapter 26. But what happened next shocked everyone in the room, including Nicholas himself. As Tony moved forward to unlock Era's cuffs, the door suddenly burst open again. This time, it wasn't Marco or another guard. It was a woman Era had never seen before, dressed in an expensive black suit, flanked by 4 armed men wearing FBI badges. Nicholas Salvatore, the woman said, her voice sharp and authoritative. I'm Special Agent Rebecca Chin, FBI. You're under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Nicholas turned slowly, his face betraying no emotion. Agent Chin. What an unexpected visit. We've been watching you for 3 years, Chin continued, stepping into the room with her badge held high. We have wiretaps, financial records, witness testimonies. Tonight was supposed to be the night we brought you down. But it seems your own people beat us to it. Era's mind reeled. The FBI. Here. Now. However, Agent Chin said, her eyes shifting to Era, we also have footage of what happened upstairs. This young woman saved your life, Mr. Salvatore. And in doing so, she may have saved us years of investigation. Because now we have something even better than bringing down one mafia boss. She pulled out another folder and opened it in front of Nicholas. Marco Benedetti has been our informant for the past 6 months. He came to us offering information about your organization in exchange for immunity and witness protection. He's been feeding us intel, helping us build our case against you. But what he didn't tell us was that he was planning to kill you and take over your empire himself. Nicholas's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The irony, Agent Chen continued, is that Marco thought he could play both sides. He'd help us destroy you legally while he destroyed you physically. Then he'd take over, and we'd have no case because our informant would be the new boss, and he'd have leverage over us. She closed the folder. But your waitress here ruined his plan. And now we have evidence of Marco's conspiracy to commit murder, his affair with Victoria Ashford, and his role in your father's assassination 10 years ago. Evidence we can use. Chapter 27. Agent Chen turned to Nicholas with an expression that was almost respectful. Here's my offer, Mr. Salvatore. You cooperate with us. You give us everything you have on Marco, on the Ashford family's involvement, on the network of corruption that allowed your father's murder to go unsolved for a decade. You help us clean up the real rot in this city. And in exchange, we'll consider a deal. Reduced charges, maybe even immunity, depending on how valuable your cooperation is. Nicholas looked at Agent Chen for a long moment, then at Era, still sitting in the chair with her hands cuffed, blood on her face, but her eyes clear and strong. And her? Nicholas asked, nodding toward Era. She's a witness, Agent Chen said. An innocent bystander who saved your life. She goes free, of course. We'll make sure she and her family are protected. Nicholas was silent, his gray eyes calculating, weighing options Era couldn't begin to imagine. Then he did something that surprised everyone in the room. He smiled. Not a warm smile, but a cold, calculating smile that sent shivers down Era's spine. Agent Chen, Nicholas said quietly, you've been watching me for 3 years. You have wiretaps, financial records, witness testimonies. And yet, you're here offering me a deal. Which means you don't have enough to convict me, do you? Marco's been feeding you information, but he's been smart enough not to implicate himself. And now that he's going down for attempted murder and conspiracy, his testimony is worthless. Agent Chen's expression hardened, but she didn't deny it. So here's my counteroffer, Nicholas continued. I give you Marco. I give you Victoria. I give you Chef Carlo and everyone else involved in tonight's conspiracy. I give you detailed testimony about my father's murder and the corruption that allowed it to happen. But I don't give you me. I don't give you my organization. And I don't cooperate with any investigation into my current business operations. That's not how this works, Agent Chen said sharply. That's exactly how this works, Nicholas replied. Because without me, you have nothing. Marco's a traitor and a murderer. His testimony is tainted. Victoria's the daughter of a Mafia boss. Her testimony is worthless. And Chef Carlo will plead the fifth. But with me, you can close a 10-year-old murder case. You can bring down a corrupt network that's been operating in this city for decades. You can be the agent who finally solved the Salvatore assassination. Chapter 28. He paused, letting his words sink in. Or, Nicholas said softly, you can try to arrest me right now, and watch your entire case fall apart in court because your star witness is a backstabbing informant who tried to commit murder. Your choice, Agent Chen. The room was silent for what felt like an eternity. Era watched the standoff between the Mafia boss and the FBI agent, Two predators circling each other, each looking for weakness. Finally, Agent Chen nodded slowly. "Fine," she said. "But you're coming with us. Voluntarily. You'll give a full statement about tonight's events and your father's murder. And if I find out you've lied about anything, the deal is off." "Agreed," Nicholas said. Then he turned to Tony. "Get Era out of those cuffs. Take her to the hospital. Make sure she and her family have everything they need. And Tony," his voice dropped lower, "make sure they're protected. If anything happens to her, I want to know about it immediately." Tony nodded and moved to unlock Era's cuffs. As the metal fell away from her wrists, Era rubbed the raw skin, trying to process everything that had just happened. Nicholas walked toward the door with Agent Chan and her team, but he paused at the threshold and looked back at Era one last time. "Thank you," he said simply. Two words that carried the weight of a life saved, a betrayal uncovered, and a debt that could never be fully repaid. Then he was gone, leaving Era sitting in the basement room, free but shaking, alive but uncertain what came next. Chapter 29. 3 days later, Era sat in a private hospital room, her injuries treated and bandaged, watching the news on the television mounted on the wall. "Breaking news," the anchor said. In a stunning development, Marco Benedetti, longtime advisor to the Salvatore crime family, has been arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and the decade-old assassination of crime boss Vincent Salvatore. Also arrested were Victoria Ashford, daughter of Chicago crime boss Frank Ashford, and chef Carlo Russo. All three are being held without bail. The screen showed footage of Marco being led out of a police station in handcuffs, his head bowed, his expensive suit rumpled. He looked nothing like the refined gentleman Era had served champagne to just 3 days ago. He looked like what he was, a traitor and a coward. In a separate development, the anchor continued, Nicholas Salvatore has agreed to cooperate with federal authorities in the investigation into his father's murder. Sources say he's provided detailed testimony that could lead to multiple additional arrests. In exchange, the U.S. Attorney's Office has agreed not to pursue charges against Mr. Salvatore related to his business operations. Era turned off the television, her mind still trying to process everything that had happened. She had saved a man's life. She had uncovered a conspiracy. She had witnessed the downfall of traitors and the intervention of the FBI. And somehow, she was still alive. There was a knock on the door, and Tony Russo stepped in, carrying a large envelope. "Miss Winters," he said respectfully, "Mr. Salvatore asked me to give you this." Era took the envelope with trembling hands and opened it. Inside was a letter written in sharp, precise handwriting. "Era, I'm writing this from a federal facility where I'm giving my testimony. I don't know when I'll be finished, or what will happen after. But I needed you to know something. You saved my life. Not just from poison, but from the betrayal I didn't see coming. You risked everything, your job, your safety, your family's future, to do what was right. That kind of courage is rare in this world. It's rarer than diamonds, rarer than loyalty, rarer than love. I can't undo what happened to you. I can't erase the fear you felt, the pain Marco inflicted, the impossible choice you had to make. But I can make sure you never have to make a choice like that again. Enclosed is a certified check for $500,000. It's not payment for saving my life, because no amount of money could ever repay that debt. It's a gift, freely given, with no strings attached. Use it to take care of your mother. Use it to give your brother the life he deserves. Use it to build the future you were never allowed to dream of. Chapter 30. I've also arranged for your mother to receive the best cancer treatment available, fully funded, for as long as she needs it. The doctors say there's a new experimental treatment that might help. She starts next week. And I've set up a trust fund for Ethan's education. Full tuition, room and board, everything he'll need from now until he finishes university. He'll never have to worry about money again. As for you, I've spoken with the director of the Salvatore Foundation. There's a position waiting for you, if you want it. Running our scholarship program. You understand what poor children need because you were one of them. You see what others don't see. That's a gift, Era. A gift this city desperately needs. But if you don't want that, if you want to walk away from all of this and never look back, I understand. You've been through enough. You deserve peace. Whatever you choose, know this. You changed my life. Not just by saving it, but by showing me that goodness still exists in this world. That there are still people who do the right thing, even when it costs them everything. I don't know if we'll see each other again. My future is uncertain. But wherever I am, whatever happens, I'll remember the girl who punched me in the face to save my life. And I'll be grateful. Thank you, Era Winters. For everything. Nicholas. Era read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope. She looked up at Tony, who was still standing by the door. Is he? She started, then stopped, not sure how to ask the question. He's fine, Tony said gently. He's cooperating with the FBI. They're protecting him. And when this is all over, he'll have a chance to rebuild. To do things differently. Era nodded, clutching the letter to her chest. And you? Tony asked. What will you do? Era thought about the question. She thought about her mother, who might actually have a chance to beat the cancer now. She thought about Ethan, who would never have to worry about money for school. She thought about the choice she'd made 3 days ago, the choice that had changed everything. I'm going to take the job, she said quietly. Someone has to help those kids. Someone has to give them the chances they deserve. And I think, she paused, a small smile forming on her bruised lips, I think I'm the right person for it. Tony smiled, a rare expression on his usually stoic face. I think you are too, Miss Winters. Chapter 31. 6 months later. Era stood in the office of the Salvatore Foundation, looking out over Manhattan as the sun set over the city. She wore a professional suit, her hair pulled back, a confident expression on her face that would have shocked the girl who'd been invisible just half a year ago. Behind her, the office was filled with files, applications from hundreds of students hoping for scholarships. She'd read every single one, looking for the kids who reminded her of herself. The ones who were smart and hungry and desperate for a chance. The ones the world had decided didn't matter. She'd given scholarships to 43 students so far. 43 kids who now had a future they'd never dared to dream of. And she was just getting started. Her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. I heard you're doing amazing work at the foundation. I always knew you would. Stay safe. Era. N. She smiled, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, not sure what to say. Nicholas had disappeared after his testimony, gone into some kind of protected status while the FBI's investigation continued. She hadn't seen him since that night in the basement. But she thought about him every day. The man who told her not to bow her head. The man whose life she'd saved. The man who'd saved her life in return by giving her family a future. Before she could respond, there was a knock on her office door. "Come in," she called. The door opened, and Era's breath caught in her throat. Nicholas Salvatore stood in the doorway, wearing a simple dark suit, his grey eyes meeting hers across the room. He looked different somehow. Lighter. As if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Hello, Era," he said quietly. "Nicholas," she breathed. "I didn't know if I'd see you again." "The FBI investigation is finished," he explained, stepping into the office. "Marco's going to prison for life. Victoria too. Chef Carlo turned state's evidence and got 20 years. And the case into my father's murder is finally closed. 23 people were arrested, including 3 city officials and a police captain." "That's," Era started, then stopped, overwhelmed. "That's incredible. It wouldn't have happened without you," Nicholas said, moving closer. "If you hadn't saved my life that night, if you hadn't told the truth even when it put you in danger, none of this would have been possible. Marco would have killed me, taken over my empire, and continued to operate with FBI protection. The people who killed my father would still be free." Chapter 32. He stopped in front of her desk, his hands in his pockets, looking almost nervous. Nicholas Salvatore, the most powerful man in New York, looking nervous in front of her. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about what you said that night. About how no one deserves to die by betrayal. About doing the right thing even when it costs everything." Era's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "I've spent my whole life in darkness," Nicholas continued. "I was born into this world. I never chose it. And I've done things, terrible things, to survive. To protect what was mine. To honor my father's memory. But you," he looked at her with those gray eyes that had once been so cold but now held something warm, something real. "You showed me there's another way. A better way." He took a step closer. "I'm getting out, Era. I'm dissolving the criminal operations. I'm keeping the legitimate businesses, the foundation, the real estate holdings, the investments. But the rest of it, the violence, the illegal activities, it's done. I'm done." Era felt tears welling in her eyes. "Nicholas, that's a huge decision." "It's the only decision," he said firmly. "Because of you. Because you risked everything to save a man you barely knew. Because you believed I deserved a chance even when I wasn't sure I deserved it myself." He reached across the desk and took her hand, his touch gentle despite the strength she knew was there. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted, and for the first time, Era heard vulnerability in his voice. "I've never lived a normal life. I don't know how to be anything other than what I've always been. But I want to try. And I want," he paused, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "I want to try with you. If you'll have me." Era looked at this man, this complicated, dangerous, damaged man who'd shown her kindness when the world had shown her none. This man who'd learned sign language for her brother. This man who'd given her family a future. This man who was trying to become someone better. "Nicholas," she said softly, "I'm just a girl from the Bronx. I'm nobody special. I'm not glamorous like Victoria. I'm not powerful. I'm not." "You're everything," Nicholas interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. "You're brave and honest and good. You see people for who they really are, not who they pretend to be. You saved my life, Era. Not just that night with the poison. Every day since then, knowing you exist, knowing there are people like you in this world, it saves me. He came around the desk and knelt in front of her chair, taking both her hands in his. I can't promise it'll be easy, he said. I have enemies. I have a past that won't disappear overnight. There will be people who don't understand, who judge you for being with me. But I can promise I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of the chance you gave me. Every single day. Era looked down at him, this powerful man on his knees before her, offering her not just his heart but his future, and she realized something profound. She had saved his life that night at the gala. But he had saved hers too. He'd given her family hope. He'd given her a purpose. He'd seen her when the world had made her invisible. Chapter 33. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll take that chance with you. Nicholas stood, pulled her up from the chair, and kissed her. Not like the stolen kisses in the office late at night months ago, but something deeper, something that felt like a promise, like a new beginning. When they finally pulled apart, Era was smiling through her tears. There's something else, Nicholas said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box, and Era's breath caught. I know it's fast, he said quickly. I know we've only known each other for 6 months. And I know you might want to wait, to be sure. But Era, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. When you've faced death, when you've lost everything and found it again, you learn not to waste time. He opened the box, revealing a ring. Not a massive diamond like Victoria would have chosen, but something elegant and simple. A sapphire the color of the evening sky surrounded by small diamonds. Era Winters, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. Will you marry me? Will you build a new life with me? Will you help me become the man you believed I could be when you punched me in the face to save my life? Era laughed, a sound of pure joy that filled the office. That has to be the strangest proposal in history, she said. Probably, Nicholas agreed, smiling. But we're not exactly a conventional couple. No, Era said, looking at the ring, at this man, at the future spreading before them like an open road. We're not. And yes, I'll marry you. Nicholas slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly. Of course it did. He'd probably had Tony find out her exact size weeks ago. I have one condition, Era said as Nicholas pulled her close. Anything, he promised. Ethan walks me down the aisle, she said. And he's going to be in every family photo, every important moment. He's part of this. Part of us. Nicholas's smile widened. I wouldn't have it any other way. That kid beats me at chess now, you know. He's too smart for his own good. He learned from the best, Era teased. They stood there in the office overlooking Manhattan, two people who should never have met, who came from completely different worlds, who'd found each other in the most unlikely way possible. Chapter 34. 1 year later. The wedding was small and intimate, held in the garden of the Salvatore estate that Nicholas had inherited from his father. No massive gala, no hundreds of guests, no photographers. Just family and the few friends they trusted completely. Era wore a simple white dress, her hair down around her shoulders, a bouquet of white roses in her hands. And beside her, wearing a small tuxedo and grinning from ear to ear, was Ethan, ready to walk his sister down the aisle. Her mother sat in the front row, weak but alive, the experimental cancer treatment having given her precious extra time. She was crying happy tears, watching her daughter marry a man who'd given their family everything. Nicholas stood at the altar in a black suit, Tony beside him as his best man, and when he saw Era appear at the end of the garden path, his eyes filled with an emotion she'd learned to recognize. Love. Pure, honest, overwhelming love. Ethan walked her slowly down the path, signing to her as they went. "You look beautiful, sister. Are you happy?" "Yes," Era signed back with her free hand. "I'm so happy." When they reached the altar, Ethan carefully placed Era's hand in Nicholas's, then signed to Nicholas, "Take care of my sister or I'll beat you at chess forever." Nicholas laughed and signed back, "Deal." The ceremony was short and sweet. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises to love each other through darkness and light, through the past they couldn't change and the future they would build together. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," Nicholas cupped Era's face gently, mindful of the scars that had long since faded but would never be forgotten, and kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Because to him, she was. Chapter 35. 5 years later. Era stood in the main hall of the Salvatore Foundation's new building, watching as hundreds of students and their families filled the space for the annual scholarship ceremony. The foundation had grown exponentially under her leadership, now providing full scholarships to over 1,000 students every year. Beside her stood Nicholas, his hand resting on her back, watching with pride as she prepared to give her speech. He'd been true to his word. He'd left the criminal world behind, focusing on legitimate business and philanthropy. It hadn't been easy. Some people hadn't believed he could change. But he'd proven them wrong, one day at a time. In the front row sat their family. Margaret, miraculously still alive, the cancer in remission though they knew every day was a gift. Ethan, now 14 years old and thriving at a prestigious school for the deaf, already talking about wanting to become a lawyer to help people like his sister had helped Nicholas. And in Era's arms, their 6-month-old daughter, Elena, named after Nicholas's mother, the woman who'd left but whom he'd forgiven, understanding now that people made choices for complicated reasons. Era handed Elena to Nicholas and stepped up to the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice carrying through the hall with a confidence she'd earned through years of hard work and purpose. 5 years ago, I was standing in a different building, the Obsidian Hotel, serving champagne to people who didn't see me. I was invisible, just another poor girl trying to survive." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces, seeing her younger self in so many of them. "That night, I made a choice. A choice that seemed impossible at the time. A choice that could have cost me everything. But it was the right choice. And it changed my entire life." She glanced at Nicholas, who was watching her with Elena asleep in his arms, a picture she never could have imagined all those years ago. "I learned something important that night," Era continued. "I learned that we all have power, even when we think we don't. The power to choose. The power to act. The power to do what's right, even when it's terrifying. Especially when it's terrifying." She looked at the students in the audience, the scholarship recipients who reminded her so much of herself. "You are here tonight because someone believed in you. Because someone saw your potential even when the world tried to make you invisible. But more importantly, you're here because you believed in yourselves. You worked hard. You persevered. You refused to let your circumstances define your future." Era's voice grew stronger. "So here's what I want you to remember. Your worth is not determined by where you come from or how much money your family has. Your worth is determined by your character, by your choices, by what you do when no one is watching and when everyone is watching. By whether you do the right thing, even when it costs you everything. She paused, letting the words sink in. 5 years ago, I punched one of the most powerful men in New York in the face to save his life, Era said, and scattered laughter rippled through the audience. It was the craziest thing I've ever done. But it was also the rightest thing I've ever done. And it taught me that sometimes the craziest choices are the ones that change everything. She smiled at the students. So don't be afraid to make the crazy choice. Don't be afraid to stand up for what's right. Don't be afraid to be brave when everything tells you to be small. Because you never know, that one moment of courage might just change your entire life. It might change someone else's life too. It might change the world. The hall erupted in applause. Nicholas stood, still holding Elena, clapping with everyone else, his eyes shining with pride and love. After the ceremony, as they walked to their car, Era carrying Elena while Nicholas held her hand, he leaned down and whispered, "I'm proud of you. Every single day, I'm proud of you. We did this together," Era said. "None of it would have been possible without you." "No," Nicholas said, stopping to look at her seriously. "You saved me first. You gave me a reason to be better. Everything else came from that." They stood there on the steps of the foundation, their daughter between them, the city lights of New York sparkling in the darkness, and Era thought about how far they'd come. From that terrifying night at the Obsidian Hotel to this moment of peace and purpose. She'd been invisible once. But she wasn't invisible anymore. She was seen. She was loved. She was making a difference. And it had all started with one punch, one choice, one moment of courage that had changed everything.